The planet Valkyrie Prime had never known war, and the creatures who lived there had never learned to fight. They had evolved in a world of gentle waters and soft light, where the greatest danger was a strong current or a sudden storm that would pass in hours and leave the skies clear once more. The Valkyrie were beautiful in a way that most species in the galaxy would call fragile. Their bodies were soft and translucent, and they glowed with a pale blue light that came from deep within their cells, a bioluminescence that had evolved over millions of years to help them communicate in the dim twilight of their ocean world. Elder Luminos was the oldest of her kind, and she had lived for nearly 400 cycles. She remembered the days when her people first built cities on the land, and when they first looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone else was out there in the great darkness. She had always believed that the universe was a kind place, full of wonders waiting to be discovered, and she had taught this belief to generation after generation of young Valkyrie who came to learn at her feet. But on this day, as she stood on the highest tower of the Crystal City and watched the sky burn with the light of alien ships, she knew that she had been wrong. The Drekath had come without warning, their massive vessels appearing in the sky like dark clouds that blocked out the stars. They were a species that the Valkyrie had never met before, and Elder Luminos had hoped that first contact would be a moment of joy and celebration. Instead, it was a nightmare. The Drekath were slavers, and they had traveled across the galaxy for thousands of years, taking whatever they wanted from species too weak to stop them. They were tall creatures with hard shells covering their bodies, and their eyes were cold and empty like the void between stars. Commander Vorn stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Hunger, and he smiled as he looked down at the glowing cities of Valkyrie Prime. He had conquered 100 worlds in his lifetime, and he had learned to recognize easy prey when he saw it. No weapon signatures anywhere on the planet, his scanner officer reported, and no military vessels in the system. These creatures have no defenses at all. Vorn laughed, and it was an ugly sound that echoed through the bridge of his ship. Perfect, he said. Absolutely perfect. Begin the harvest immediately, and make sure to capture the young ones first, because they always fetch the highest prices at the markets. The first Drekoth landing ships descended on the Crystal City within the hour, and the Valkyrie had no idea what was happening. They gathered in the streets and watched the alien vessels land, their bodies glowing with curiosity and excitement at the thought of meeting new friends from the stars. They did not understand until it was too late. The Drekoth soldiers marched out of their ships with weapons drawn, and they began grabbing Valkyrie without mercy. Families were torn apart as parents reached desperately for their children, and the screams of the terrified filled the air like a song of sorrow. Elder Luminos watched from her tower as her people were dragged toward the alien ships in chains, and tears of light rolled down her translucent face. She had lived for 400 cycles, and she had never felt such pain in her heart. "What do we do?" asked Keeper Shine, her youngest advisor, who stood beside her trembling with fear. "Elder, what can we possibly do against such creatures?" Luminos did not answer at first, because she did not have an answer. The Valkyrie had no weapons, no soldiers, no way to fight back against the invaders who were stealing their people like they were nothing more than cargo to be sold. But then she remembered something from the ancient texts, something that her own teacher had told her centuries ago when she was young and full of questions about the universe. "There is a beacon," she said softly, "a device left behind by the founding races who walked among the stars before any of us were born. It was placed here as a gift, they said, to be used only in the darkest hour when all hope seemed lost." Keeper Shine looked at her with wide eyes that flickered with desperate hope. "A beacon? What does it do?" "It sends a message," Luminos replied. a cry for help that travels across the galaxy to places we have never seen and reaches species we have never met. The founding races said that someone would always answer, that somewhere in the universe there would always be those who came to the aid of the helpless. "Do you believe that?" Shine asked. Luminos looked out at the burning city below, where Drekkath's soldiers continued their terrible work of taking her people away. "I do not know what I believe anymore," she admitted, "but I know that we must try, because doing nothing means accepting our fate, and I am not ready to accept this." She led Keeper Shine down through the tower to a chamber that had been sealed for longer than anyone could remember. The door was covered in symbols that glowed when Luminos placed her hand upon them, and it opened slowly to reveal a room filled with ancient technology that hummed with power. In the center of the room stood the beacon, a tall pillar of crystal and metal that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Luminos approached it carefully, her heart beating fast in her chest as she reached out to touch its surface. "I do not know if anyone will hear this," she whispered, "and I do not know if anyone will come, but I must try for the sake of my people." She activated the beacon, and it came to life with a sound like singing, a beautiful and terrible cry that shot upward, through the tower, and into the sky, and out into the endless void of space. The message was simple, because the Velkhari did not have time for complicated words. It said only this: "We are being taken. We cannot fight. If anyone hears this, please help us. We do not wish to disappear." Commander Vorn was aboard his flagship when his communications officer detected the transmission. He listened to it with a sneer on his hard face, and then dismissed it with a wave of his clawed hand. "A distress signal?" he said with amusement. "Let them cry out to the empty stars. No one cares about the weak, and no one will come to save them. Continue the harvest." But the beacon's cry did not vanish into nothing as Vorn believed it would. Instead, it traveled faster than light across the darkness of space, passing through systems where ancient civilizations had risen and fallen, passing through nebulas where new stars were being born, passing through regions of the galaxy marked on every chart with the same warning: Deathworld Zone, no contact advised. In one of those forbidden zones, on the third planet orbiting a yellow star, the signal reached a species that had never learned to ignore a cry for help. The signal reached Earth, and on Earth, in a vast complex buried beneath a mountain, a young communications officer named Chen Wei sat up straight in her chair as her equipment began to flash with alerts. She had been monitoring deep space signals for 3 years, and she had never seen anything like this. "Commander," she called out, her voice shaking with excitement and fear, "you need to see this right now. We have received a transmission from beyond the colonial frontier, and it appears to be a distress call from an unknown alien species." The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at her screen, where the alien message played on repeat, its meaning clear even before the translation software finished its work. Someone out there was afraid, and someone out there was asking for help. And humanity had always had a complicated relationship with such requests. They could not simply ignore them, not after everything their own history had taught them about the cost of looking away when others suffered. The cry for mercy had reached the stars, and now the stars would answer. But the Drekkath did not know this yet, and they continued their work on Velkhari Prime, confident that nothing in the universe could stop them. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Admiral Kira Okonkwo had seen many things in her 50 years of life, and she had fought in more battles than she cared to remember. She had been born on Earth in a small village in Nigeria, and she had grown up listening to her grandmother tell stories about the old days, when humans still fought each other instead of exploring the stars together. Those stories had taught her something important, that the strong had a duty to protect the weak, and that turning away from those in need was the greatest shame a person could carry. Now she stood in the war room of the United Earthship Perseverance, the flagship of the Third Response Fleet, and she listened to the alien transmission that Communications Officer Chen Wei had forwarded to her command. The message played through the speakers, first in its original form, a series of sounds that were both beautiful and heartbreaking, and then in the translated version that the ship's artificial intelligence had produced. "We are being taken. We cannot fight. If anyone hears this, please help us. We do not wish to disappear." The room was silent when the message ended, and Admiral Okonkwo looked around at the faces of her senior officers. She saw confusion on some faces and pity on others. But what she did not see was indifference, and that made her proud. "Where did this come from?" she asked. Commander James Morrison, her second-in-command, pulled up a star chart on the main display. The signal originated from a system called Valkyrie, approximately 14 light-years beyond the colonial frontier. It is in a region we have never explored, and we have no treaties or agreements with anyone in that sector. "Which means we have no authority there," said Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka, the ship's legal officer, "and responding to this signal could be considered an act of war if the aggressors are a recognized galactic power." Admiral Okonkwo nodded slowly, her dark eyes never leaving the star chart. "What do we know about the species that sent this message?" "Almost nothing," Morrison admitted. The translation software identified their language as previously unknown, and the signal itself suggests a pre-military civilization with no defensive capabilities. Whoever they are, they appear to be completely helpless. And the aggressors? Morrison's face grew grim. "Based on the secondary signals we intercepted from the same system, we believe the attackers are the Drekath Dominion. They are a known slaver empire that operates in the outer regions of the galaxy, and they have been designated as hostile by the Galactic Council." "Slavers," Okonkwo repeated, and her voice was cold as ice. She walked to the window and looked out at the stars, her reflection ghostly against the void. She remembered her grandmother's stories about Earth's own history of slavery, about the millions who had suffered and died in chains, and about the long struggle to end that terrible practice. Humanity had learned hard lessons from its own past, and one of those lessons was that slavery was an evil that could never be tolerated, no matter where it occurred or who was responsible. "How long would it take us to reach this system?" she asked without turning around. 14 days at maximum burn," Morrison replied. "But Admiral, Command has not authorized any operations in that sector. If we go there without permission, we could face serious consequences when we return." Okonkwo finally turned to face her officers, and there was fire in her eyes. "I have been a soldier for 30 years, and I have followed orders that I did not agree with more times than I can count. But there are some orders I will never follow, and there are some things I will never ignore." She pointed at the display, where the star chart still showed the distant system called Valkyrie. "Somewhere out there, right now, innocent people are being taken from their homes and put in chains. They sent a message into the darkness, asking for help. And that message reached us. Are we supposed to pretend we never heard it?" The room was silent, and Okonkwo looked at each of her officers in turn. "I am not going to pretend," she said firmly. "I am going to answer that call, and I am going to do everything in my power to save those people. Anyone who does not want to be part of this mission can transfer to another ship, and I will not hold it against them." No one moved, and no one spoke, and after a long moment, Admiral Okonkwo smiled. "I did not think so. Now let us get to work." Within the hour, the Perseverance had changed course and was burning hard toward the edge of known space. Behind it came 3 more warships, the Ironclad, the Defiant, and the Last Light, each one crewed by men and women who had chosen to follow their admiral into the unknown. In the engine room of the Perseverance, Chief Engineer Kofi Mensah pushed his team to their limits. "I need more power to the FTL drive," he shouted over the roar of the machinery. "If the Admiral says we need to be there in 14 days, then we will be there in 14 days, and I do not want to hear any excuses." His engineers worked without rest, adjusting systems and rerouting power, and slowly the ship began to move faster than it had ever moved before. They all knew what was at stake, and they all knew that every hour mattered. On the bridge, Tactical Officer Maria Santos was preparing the ship's weapons. The Perseverance carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon, and Santos intended to make sure every weapon was ready for whatever they would find at Valkyrie Prime. "Load all railgun magazines with armor-piercing rounds," she ordered her team. "Arm the missile bays with hunter-killer warheads, and bring the point defense systems online. I want this ship ready for war by the time we arrive." Her team moved with practiced efficiency, and soon the ship was humming with deadly potential. Santos had fought the Drekath once before, years ago during a skirmish near the colonial frontier, and she knew they were dangerous enemies who showed no mercy to their victims. But she also knew something else. The Drekath had never faced a fully prepared human battle fleet, and they had no idea what they were about to encounter. In the medical bay, Dr. Amara Johnson was preparing for a different kind of battle. "We do not know anything about the biology of the species we are trying to save," she told her medical team. "We need to be ready to treat injuries we have never seen before and illnesses we do not understand." She began pulling up every piece of information the ship's database had about xenobiology, studying the ways different alien species responded to trauma and stress. It was not much, but it was a start, and Dr. Johnson had never let a lack of information stop her from saving lives. Throughout the ship, the crew prepared in their own ways. Some wrote messages to their families back on Earth, knowing they might never return. Others gathered in the ship's chapel to pray or meditate, and still others simply sat with their friends and talked about why they had joined the fleet in the first place. Private First Class David Kim sat in the mess hall with his squad, a group of young Marines who had never seen real combat. "I keep thinking about that message," he said quietly. "Those aliens, they do not even have weapons. They cannot fight back at all. Imagine what that must feel like, to be completely helpless while someone takes everything from you." Sergeant Rosa Delgado nodded, her weathered face thoughtful. "That is why we exist," she said. "Not to conquer or control, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves. It is the oldest duty there is, and it is the reason I became a Marine." The young soldiers looked at her with respect, and Kim felt something stir in his chest, a sense of purpose that he had never quite felt before. They were not just soldiers going into battle. They were protectors answering a call for help, and that made all the difference. On the bridge, Admiral Okonkwo received a communication from Earth Command. As she expected, it was not a friendly message. The face on her screen was that of Fleet Admiral Harrison Brooks, and he did not look happy. "Admiral Okonkwo, you have taken 4 warships into unauthorized territory without permission. Do you have any idea how much trouble you are causing?" Okonkwo met his gaze without flinching. "With respect, Admiral, I have heard a cry for help from innocent people who are being enslaved, and I intend to answer it. You can court-martial me when I return, but until then, I have work to do." Brooks stared at her for a long moment, and then something shifted in his expression. "Off the record," he said slowly, "there are a lot of people here who wish they could do what you are doing. Bring those people home safely, Kira, and we will figure out the politics later." The communication ended, and Okonkwo allowed herself a small smile. Maybe humanity had learned more from its history than she had thought. The stars streamed past the windows as the fleet raced toward Valkyrie Prime, and somewhere in the darkness ahead, a peaceful species waited for salvation they did not believe would come. But it was coming, carried by warriors from a world of fire and ice and endless struggle, a world that had taught its children to never ignore the cries of the helpless. 14 days had passed since the beacon's cry, and the Velkari had lost nearly half their population to the Drekath slave ships. The Crystal City was a shadow of what it had once been, its beautiful towers dark and silent, its streets empty except for the patrols of armored soldiers who searched for anyone still hiding. Elder Luminos had escaped capture only because Keeper Shine had hidden her in a cavern beneath the old temple, a place so ancient that even most Velkari had forgotten it existed. She spent her days in darkness, listening to the distant sounds of her people being taken away, and her nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if her beacon had been nothing more than a futile gesture. "No one is coming," she whispered to Shine on the 14th night. "The universe is vast and empty, and we are alone in our suffering." Shine held her hand, his own light dim with grief. "Perhaps you are right," he admitted. "But even if no help comes, at least we tried. At least we did not go quietly into the darkness." Above them, Commander Vorn stood on the bridge of the Endless Hunger and surveyed his work with satisfaction. His ships had collected over 3 million Velkari so far, and the markets would pay handsomely for such docile and attractive slaves. This had been one of his most profitable operations in decades. "Sir," his scanner officer said suddenly, "I am detecting unusual energy signatures at the edge of the system." Vorn turned, his interest mildly piqued. "What kind of signatures?" The officer worked his console for a moment, then looked up with confusion on his face. "I am not certain, Commander. It looks like faster-than-light exit points, but the readings are strange. Whatever is coming, it is coming very fast and very close." "Show me," Vorn commanded. The main display flickered to life, showing the space near Velkari Prime. For a moment, everything looked normal, just stars and the blackness of the void. But then 4 points of light appeared, growing brighter and brighter until they seemed to tear holes in reality itself. 4 ships emerged from faster-than-light travel, and they did so in a way that made every Drekath officer on the bridge gasp in shock. The ships had exited FTL inside the gravity well of Velkari Prime, less than 1,000 kilometers from the Drekath fleet. This was supposed to be impossible. Every species in the galaxy knew that exiting faster-than-light travel inside a gravity well meant certain death from gravitational shear. But these ships were not dead. They were very much alive, and they were already moving into attack formation. Commander Vorn stared at the display, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The ships were unlike anything in his database. They were blocky and angular, with none of the elegant curves that most spacefaring species preferred. Their hulls were covered in thick plates of metal that looked like armor, and they bristled with external weapons that made them look like angry predators ready to strike. "What are those things?" he demanded. "What species builds ships like that?" His database officer worked frantically, searching for any information that might identify the newcomers. "Commander," he said finally, his voice trembling, "I'd have found a match, but it does not make sense. These ships appear to be from a species called humans, from a planet designated as a Class 12 Deathworld." Deathworld? What is a Class 12 Deathworld? It is the highest danger classification for a planet, Commander. It means the world has extreme gravity, extreme temperatures, extreme radiation, deadly predators, toxic atmosphere, and a native species that evolved to survive all of those things. The galactic recommendation for such worlds is permanent quarantine and no contact under any circumstances. Vorn felt something cold crawl up his spine, but he pushed the feeling down. He was Commander Vorn the Collector, and he had never retreated from any enemy. "They are outnumbered," he said. "We have 15 ships, and they have only 4. All vessels, prepare to engage." Before his fleet could respond, a transmission cut through every channel, overpowering all other signals with its strength. A voice spoke, translated into perfect Drekath by some unknown technology, and it was a voice that carried absolute authority. "This is Admiral Kira Okonkwo of the United Earth Fleet. You are engaged in illegal slave operations against a sapient species. You have one chance to withdraw. There will not be a second warning." The bridge of the endless hunger was silent for a long moment, and Vorn could see fear beginning to spread among his crew. These humans, these Deathworld creatures, had done something impossible just by arriving, and now they were demanding surrender as if they had already won. Vorn decided to show them how wrong they were. "Ignore their threats," he commanded. "All ships, open fire. Destroy these intruders." The Drekath fleet responded instantly, 15 warships turning their weapons toward the 4 human vessels. Energy beams lanced across the void, missiles streaked through space, and for a moment it seemed like the humans would be overwhelmed by sheer firepower. They did not even seem to notice the attack. The energy beams splashed harmlessly against their armored hulls, dissipating without causing any visible damage. The missiles detonated against shields that absorbed the impacts and kept going, and through it all, the 4 human ships continued their advance without slowing down. "Impossible," Vorn breathed. "How are they surviving?" On the bridge of the Perseverance, Admiral Okonkwo watched the enemy fire with calm professionalism. "Damage report," she said. "Shields holding at 92%, Tactical Officer Santos replied. "Their weapons are primarily energy-based, with low kinetic impact. Our armor can handle this all day." Okonkwo nodded. She had expected as much. Most galactic species had evolved on peaceful worlds, where violence was rare, and their weapons reflected that. They built elegant beams of light and graceful missiles that were designed to be efficient and clean. Humans had evolved differently. They had evolved on a world where everything wanted to kill them, where survival meant being tougher and meaner than anything else. Their weapons were not elegant or clean. They were brutal instruments of destruction designed to end threats permanently. "Return fire," Okonkwo ordered. "Target their engines first. I want them unable to run." The Perseverance's railguns roared to life, launching dense metal slugs at 3% the speed of light. The first slug hit a Drekath cruiser amidships and punched straight through, entering one side and exiting the other, before the crew even knew what had happened. The ship broke apart in a silent explosion, and suddenly the Drekath fleet understood that they were not fighting a normal enemy. "All ships, evasive maneuvers," Vorn screamed, but it was already too late. The 4 human warships moved through the Drekath formation like predators through a herd of prey, their weapons firing with terrifying precision. Railgun slugs shattered hulls that had never been designed to withstand kinetic impacts. Missile swarms tracked fleeing ships with artificial intelligence that predicted every dodge and weave, and through it all, the humans pressed forward without mercy. On Valkyrie Prime, Elder Luminos felt the ground shake as debris from destroyed ships began falling through the atmosphere. She crawled out of her hiding place and looked up at the sky, where lights were flashing like a storm of stars. "What is happening?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Keeper Shine emerged beside her, his light flickering with awe and terror. "Someone is fighting the Drekath," he said. "Someone came." They watched together as the battle raged above their world, and for the first time in 14 days, Luminos felt something she had thought was dead forever. Hope. Commander Vorn watched his fleet die around him, and he knew that he had made a terrible mistake. These humans were not like any species he had ever encountered. They fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness, and they showed no hesitation or fear. "Full retreat," he ordered. "All ships jump to FTL immediately." But the human ships had anticipated this. They had positioned themselves to cut off the escape routes. And now the Drekath fleet was trapped between the planet and 4 vessels that seemed determined to destroy every last one of them. The endless hunger shuddered as a railgun slug tore through its shield generators, and Vorn knew that his flagship was dying. He had one chance left, a desperate gamble that might let him escape, while his remaining ships kept the humans busy. "Prepare my personal shuttle," he ordered his aide. "I am transferring command to the secondary flagship." He never made it to the shuttle bay. The next impact hit the bridge directly, and Commander Vorn the Collector, who had enslaved millions across the galaxy, died without ever understanding what had killed him. The battle lasted less than an hour, and when it was over, the Drekkath fleet no longer existed. 13 ships had been destroyed, and 2 had been disabled and captured. Not a single vessel had escaped to carry word of what had happened at Valkyrie Prime. On the bridge of the Perseverance, Admiral Okonkwo allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction before turning to the next task. "Begin landing operations," she ordered. "I want Marines on the ground within the hour, and I want those slave ships secured. We have people to save." The first human dropship descended through the atmosphere of Valkyrie Prime, and inside it sat 30 Marines who were about to make first contact with a species that had never imagined creatures like them could exist. Among them was Private First Class David Kim, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and purpose. He had trained for years, but nothing could truly prepare him for this moment. The dropship landed in the central square of the Crystal City, and the Marines deployed quickly, their weapons ready for any threat. But there was no resistance. Only the empty streets and dark towers of a city that had been ransacked by slavers. And watching from the shadows, her body glowing with faint blue light, Elder Luminos saw the strange armored creatures emerge from their vessel. They were terrifying in appearance, covered in hard shells, and carrying objects that she instinctively knew were weapons. But they had destroyed the Drekkath, and that meant they might be friends. She stepped out of hiding and walked toward them, her ancient body trembling with exhaustion and hope. "Please," she said in her own language, hoping they could understand. "Are you the ones who answered our call?" A translator device on one of the Marines crackled to life, and a moment later a voice responded, strange and alien, but somehow kind. "Yes, we heard you. We came as fast as we could. You are safe now." Luminos felt her legs give out beneath her, and she would have fallen if the Marine had not caught her. She looked up at the face behind the helmet's visor, and saw something she had never expected to see in an alien's eyes. Compassion. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for coming." The Marine held her gently, as if she were made of glass. "You called for help," he said simply. That was enough. Above them, the human fleet maintained its vigil, and across Valkyrie Prime, the work of liberation had begun. The liberation of Valkyrie Prime was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Within hours of the battle ending, human Marines had secured every Drekkath landing site, and begun the difficult work of freeing the millions of Valkyrie who had been captured and caged. Admiral Okonkwo descended to the planet's surface once the immediate area was declared safe. She stepped out of her dropship into the pale twilight of this alien world and took a moment to look around at the devastation the slavers had caused. The Crystal City had been beautiful once. She could see that in the elegant spires and graceful bridges that remained standing. But now it was scarred and broken, its streets littered with debris, and its towers dark with grief. A group of Marines approached her, and with them came a small glowing figure that Okonkwo recognized from the initial contact reports. This was Elder Luminos, the one who had activated the beacon and called for help. "Admiral," Private Kim said, "this is the leader of the Valkyrie. She wishes to speak with you." Okonkwo knelt down so that she was closer to the Elder's height. It was a gesture of respect that she had learned long ago, and she could see that the alien understood its meaning. "Elder Luminos," she said through her translator, "I am Admiral Kira Okonkwo. I am sorry we could not arrive sooner." Luminos studied the human before her with eyes that had seen 4 centuries of life. The Admiral was smaller than the armored soldiers, but there was something about her that commanded attention. A quiet strength that reminded Luminos of the ancient stones that had stood on her world since before her people learned to speak. "You came," Luminos said, and her voice trembled with emotion. "I sent a message into the darkness, believing that no one would hear. And yet you came. Why?" Okonkwo considered the question carefully before answering. "On our world, there is an old saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Your people were suffering, and we had the power to help. For us, that was reason enough." "But we are strangers to you," Luminos pressed. "We have nothing to offer in return. We cannot repay this debt." "There is no debt," Okonkwo replied firmly. "We did not come here seeking payment or profit. We came because someone needed help, and that is what our people do." Luminos was silent for a long moment, processing this extraordinary statement. In all her years, she had never encountered a species that offered aid without expecting something in return. It went against everything she thought she knew about the universe. "Your people," she said finally. "They are very strange." Okonkwo smiled, the first smile she had allowed herself since the battle began. "But we try to use our strangeness for good." Across the planet, the rescue operations continued at a furious pace. The Drekath slave ships had been captured intact, and inside them were nearly 2 million Velkari who had been packed into holding cells like cargo. Dr. Amara Johnson led the medical teams that boarded the slave ships, and what she found inside made her sick with anger. The Velkari had been given minimal food and water, their bioluminescence dim from stress and malnutrition, their bodies weak from days of confinement in tiny spaces. "I need more medics down here," she called through her communicator. "And bring blankets and rations. These people have not been properly cared for since they were taken." Her teams worked through the night, carrying the weakest Velkari to the medical stations that had been set up on the surface, and providing emergency care to those who could not be moved. It was exhausting work, but not a single human complained. Private Kim found himself assigned to one of the liberation teams, moving through the slave ships and opening the cells one by one. The Velkari inside looked at him with fear at first, their bodies flickering with terror at the sight of another armored figure. "It is okay," he said gently, his translator converting his words into their language. "The bad people are gone. You are free now. We are here to take you home." One young Velkari, barely more than a child, reached out and touched his armored hand. "You are not going to hurt us?" she asked. Kim removed his helmet so she could see his face. "No," he promised. "We are never going to hurt you. We came to save you." The child's light brightened slightly, and she smiled, a beautiful, luminous expression that made Kim's heart ache. "Thank you," she whispered. And then she hugged his leg with her small, soft arms. Kim stood there for a moment, this trained warrior who had been prepared to kill, now frozen in place by the trust of an alien child. He looked down at her and felt tears forming in his eyes. "Come on," he said softly. "Let us get you out of here." Throughout the rescue operations, similar scenes played out again and again. Velkari, who had lost hope, found themselves in the arms of humans who treated them with gentleness and care. Families that had been separated were reunited with the help of human technology. And slowly, the light began to return to a world that had nearly been extinguished. Sergeant Rosa Delgado led a team into the depths of the largest slave ship, searching for any captives who might have been overlooked. The corridors were dark and cramped, designed for efficiency rather than comfort, and the smell of fear still lingered in the recycled air. "Keep your eyes open," she told her squad. "We do not leave until we are certain we have found everyone." They searched for hours, checking every compartment and every storage space. And in the lowest level of the ship, they found something that made even these hardened soldiers stop in their tracks. A nursery. A room full of Velkhari children who had been separated from their parents and marked for special sale. There were hundreds of them, their lights dim and their eyes full of despair. Delgado felt rage burning in her chest, a fury so intense that she had to take several deep breaths to control it. These monsters had been planning to sell children, to tear them away from everything they knew and ship them across the galaxy as property. "Get them out," she ordered, her voice thick with emotion. "Every single one, and find their parents." The reunification process took days, but the humans refused to give up until every child was returned to their family. They used genetic scanning technology to match parents with children, and they searched the entire planet for families that had been scattered by the Drekath raids. When the last child was finally reunited with her mother, the Velkhari who had gathered to watch erupted in a display of light that turned the twilight into something like day. Their bioluminescence blazed with joy and gratitude, and the humans who witnessed it would never forget the sight. Admiral Okonkwo stood with Elder Luminos and watched the celebration. "Your people have been through a terrible ordeal," she said. "The road to recovery will be long." "Yes," Luminos agreed, "but we will walk it together, and we will remember who helped us when we could not help ourselves." She turned to face the Admiral directly, her ancient eyes shining with a new light. "I have a question for you, Admiral Okonkwo. In your language, what do you call a person who saves another person from danger?" Okonkwo thought about it. "We have many words: rescuer, savior, protector, hero." "Hero," Luminos repeated, tasting the unfamiliar word. "I like that. From this day forward, my people will remember the humans as heroes, and we will teach our children to honor your name for as long as we exist." "We do not need to be honored," Okonkwo said. "We just did what was right." "That," Luminos replied softly, "is exactly what makes you worthy of honor." The work of rebuilding began in the following days. Human engineers helped repair damaged infrastructure, while human doctors continued to treat the injured. Supplies were brought down from the ships: food, medicine, equipment, everything that a recovering society might need. Commander Morrison approached the Admiral with a report. "We have received word from Earth Command," he said. "The Galactic Council has been informed of what happened here, and they are requesting a full accounting of our actions." Okonkwo nodded. She had expected this. "What is their mood?" "Confused, mostly. Several council species are shocked that we intervened in a situation that did not directly concern us. They do not understand why we would risk our ships and our people for strangers." "They will understand eventually," Okonkwo said. "Or they will not. Either way, we did the right thing, and that is what matters." She looked out at the Crystal City, where Velkhari were beginning to emerge from hiding and reclaim their homes. Lights were appearing in windows that had been dark for weeks, and the sounds of life were slowly returning to streets that had known only silence. "Prepare the fleet for departure," she told Morrison. "Our work here is almost done, but before we leave, I want to speak with Elder Luminos one more time." She found the Elder in the great temple at the center of the city, standing before an ancient altar that had been damaged during the invasion. Luminos was performing some kind of ritual, her body glowing as she moved through a series of graceful gestures. Okonkwo waited until the ritual was complete before approaching. "Elder, I came to say goodbye. My ships must return to our space, but I wanted you to know that you can contact us if you ever need help again." Luminos turned to face her, and the Admiral was struck by how much the Elder's light had brightened since they first met. "You are leaving so soon?" "We have done what we came to do. Your people are free, and the Drekath will not return to this place. The rest of the rebuilding must be done by you, at your own pace and in your own way. You have given us proof that the universe is not as cold and cruel as we feared." The two leaders stood together in the ancient temple, one from a world of gentle twilight, and one from a world of fire and struggle. And in that moment, they understood each other perfectly. Hope was a gift that could travel across the stars, and the humans had delivered it to a people who had nearly lost everything. The admiral returned to her ship, and the fleet prepared to depart. But as the Perseverance rose through the atmosphere of Valkyrie Prime, Okonkwo stood at the window and looked down at the world they were leaving behind. The lights were returning, one by one, and the darkness was fading. The news of what happened at Valkyrie Prime spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within days, every spacefaring civilization had heard some version of the story, and the details grew more incredible with each retelling. A distress signal had been sent into the void, they said, a desperate cry from a helpless species being harvested by the Drekath Dominion. No one had expected an answer, because no civilized power would risk war over strangers. But someone had answered. A species from the Forbidden Zones, from a Deathworld so dangerous that the Galactic Council had marked it with permanent quarantine warnings. These creatures called themselves humans, and they had destroyed an entire Drekath fleet in less than an hour. The implications of this event rippled through galactic politics like waves from a stone thrown into still water. Powers that had operated with impunity for centuries suddenly found themselves reconsidering their actions. In the throne room of the Drekath Dominion, the High Emperor listened to reports of the disaster with cold fury. "Explain to me," he said slowly, "how 15 warships were destroyed by 4 vessels from a species we had never encountered." His military advisor trembled as he delivered the analysis. "The humans fought in ways we have never seen, Majesty. Their weapons are kinetic rather than energy-based, designed to cause maximum physical damage. Their ships are built to absorb punishment that would destroy any of our vessels. And their tactics are extremely aggressive, almost reckless by our standards." Reckless? "They exited faster than light travel inside a gravity well, Majesty. Every species in the galaxy knows this is suicide, but the humans did it as if it were routine. Our analysts believe they have developed technologies that we cannot replicate." The High Emperor sat in silence for a long moment. "And what do these humans want?" "That is the most disturbing part, Majesty. According to intercepted communications, they want nothing. They intervened at Valkyrie Prime simply because they received a distress signal and chose to respond. They asked for no payment, no territory, no political concessions." "That is absurd," the Emperor said. "No one does anything for nothing. There must be something they want." "Perhaps, Majesty, but we have not yet discovered what it is. However, our intelligence suggests that the humans may respond similarly to other distress calls in the future. They appear to have a cultural compulsion to assist those they perceive as victims." The Emperor considered this information. The Drekath Dominion had built its empire on the slave trade, taking from species too weak to resist. If the humans were willing to intervene on behalf of any species that called for help, the entire foundation of Drekath power was threatened. "Cancel all operations in sectors adjacent to human space," he ordered, "and send diplomatic envoys to establish contact. I want to know everything about these creatures before we decide how to proceed." Similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. The merchant consortium recalculated their trade routes to avoid potential conflict with human patrols. The Stellar Collective quietly shelved plans to annex 3 systems, whose inhabitants had recently sent unanswered distress signals. And the Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss the sudden appearance of a new major power. Ambassador Zeth of the Calorian Confederacy addressed the Council with barely concealed alarm. "We must consider the implications of a species that intervenes in conflicts without invitation. Today, they saved the Valkyrie, but tomorrow they might decide to save someone from us. How do we know they will not impose their values on the entire galaxy?" "Perhaps," replied Ambassador Drina of the Harmonious Collective. "That depends on how we behave. If we treat other species fairly, we should have nothing to fear from a power that only intervenes to prevent injustice." "You assume we can trust their definition of justice," Zeth countered. "These are Deathworlders, creatures forged by violence and hardship. Who knows what twisted morality they might possess?" The debate continued for hours, with different species expressing different concerns. Some feared the humans, some admired them, and many simply did not understand them. But while the powerful argued about politics and threats, the ordinary people of the galaxy were having a different conversation. In markets and meeting halls, in homes and habitats, beings of 1,000 species shared the story of what had happened at Valkyrie Prime. They spoke of a species that had crossed the stars to answer a stranger's call for help. They spoke of warriors who fought with terrible fury but treated the rescued with gentle kindness. They spoke of a people who asked for nothing in return and left as soon as their work was done. For the weak and the vulnerable, for those who had always lived in fear of the strong, the story offered something precious and rare, the possibility that someone might care enough to help. On a space station orbiting a red dwarf star, a young alien named Kos listened to the story with wonder in his eyes. His species, the Tramari, had been living under the shadow of a larger power for generations, paying tribute and suffering abuse because they lacked the strength to resist. "Do you think they would help us?" he asked his teacher. The old Tramari shook her head sadly. "We are very far from human space, child, and our troubles are not as dramatic as an invasion. The humans cannot save everyone, but they saved the Valkyrie," Kos insisted. "They came all that way just because someone asked. Maybe if we asked too." "Perhaps," his teacher said, "but perhaps we should try to save ourselves first. If the humans can teach us anything, it is that we should not accept injustice simply because fighting seems impossible." This sentiment spread along with the story. Species that had been passive in the face of oppression began to question whether submission was truly their only option. Resistance movements that had been dormant for years found new members and new purpose. And everywhere, beings began to speak of humanity not just as saviors, but as an example. Back on Valkyrie Prime, the recovery continued slowly but steadily. The Crystal City was being rebuilt, its towers rising once again toward the stars. And the Valkyrie were emerging from the trauma of their near extinction with a new perspective on the universe. Elder Luminos stood before the new Council of Light, addressing the gathered leaders of her people. "We were wrong about many things," she said. "We believed that violence was always evil, that peaceful species can survive only by hiding from the dangerous. We believed that no one would ever help those who could not help themselves." She paused, her light flickering with emotion. "The humans taught us a different truth. They are violent, yes, perhaps the most violent species in the galaxy, but they choose to direct that violence against those who prey upon the weak. They are proof that strength and compassion can exist together, that one can be a warrior and a protector at the same time." "What do you propose, Elder?" asked Keeper Shine, who now sat among the council members. "I propose that we change," Luminos replied. "Not to become warriors ourselves, for that is not our nature, but to become allies to those who are. I propose that we reach out to the humans and offer friendship, and that we dedicate ourselves to a new purpose, to be the eyes and ears of the galaxy, listening for cries for help, and passing them along to those who can respond." The council debated the proposal for many days, but in the end, they agreed. The Valkyrie would not remain isolated any longer. They would become part of something larger, a network of species committed to ensuring that no cry for mercy went unanswered. On Earth, Admiral Okonkwo returned to a complicated reception. Some politicians criticized her for acting without authorization, while others praised her for upholding humanity's highest ideals. The media called her everything from a reckless warmonger to a heroic champion of justice. She ignored most of it, and focused on writing her report. In it, she described not just the military operation, but the people she had met. The brave elder who had activated the beacon against all hope. The children who had been rescued from the slave ships. The gratitude in the eyes of beings who had never expected to be saved. "We did not go to Velkari Prime seeking glory or profit," she wrote in her conclusion. "We went because someone was suffering, and we had the power to help." This is not a new concept for humanity. It is embedded in the deepest parts of our culture, from the ancient codes of warriors who protected the innocent to the modern laws that demand we respond to those in distress. What was new was the scale, the realization that our reach now extends to the stars, and that the responsibilities we have always felt toward our own kind may extend to others as well. The report was classified, but its contents eventually leaked. People across Earth read the Admiral's words and felt something stir in their hearts. Pride, yes, but also a sense of purpose. If humanity could make a difference in the galaxy, then perhaps they should. Months passed, and the galaxy continued to change. The Drekath Dominion quietly scaled back its slaving operations, finding the business less profitable when there was a risk of human intervention. Other predatory powers followed suit, calculating that the potential costs outweighed the benefits. And on 100 worlds, in 1,000 languages, beings told stories about the day a cry for mercy reached the stars, and the Deathworld humans answered. On the 1-year anniversary of the liberation, a ceremony was held on Velkari Prime. Representatives from dozens of species attended, including a human delegation led by Admiral Okonkwo herself. Elder Luminos unveiled a monument that had been built in the central square of the Crystal City. It was a sculpture of two figures, a Velkari and a human, standing side by side, their hands clasped in friendship, looking up toward the stars. "This monument will stand for as long as our civilization endures," Luminos announced. "It will remind us and our children and our children's children that we are not alone in the universe, that somewhere among the stars there are those who will hear our cries and come to our aid, and it will remind us of our duty to do the same for others." Admiral Okonkwo stepped forward to respond. "On behalf of humanity, I accept this honor with humility. We did only what we hope any decent species would do. But I want you to know that this is not the end. It is the beginning. We came to Velkari Prime because we heard a call for help, and we will continue to listen. Wherever there is injustice, wherever the innocent suffer at the hands of the cruel, we will be there." She looked out at the crowd, humans and Velkari and dozens of other species, all gathered together in this place that had so recently known only darkness and despair. "The universe can be cold and cruel," she continued, "but it does not have to be. Not if we choose otherwise, not if we stand together against those who would prey upon the weak. This is the lesson of Velkari Prime, and it is a lesson we must never forget." The crowd erupted in applause and glowing lights, and for a moment, the Crystal City was as bright as a star. Beings who had been strangers a year ago now stood as allies and friends, united by an act of courage that had changed everything. Elder Luminos looked at Admiral Okonkwo and smiled. "You know," she said softly, "when I activated that beacon, I truly believed no one would come. I thought I was just a foolish old creature shouting into the void." Okonkwo smiled back. "The void is not as empty as you thought." "No," Luminos agreed, "it is not, and thanks to your people, it is a little less frightening as well." They stood together as the celebration continued around them, two leaders from worlds separated by unimaginable distances, but connected now by bonds that would never be broken. The cry for mercy had reached the stars, and the stars had answered. And in that answer, the galaxy had glimpsed something it had never seen before, proof that even in the darkness between worlds, there was light enough to guide the way home. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of hope. And as long as there were those willing to answer when the helpless called, that hope would never die. This was the legacy of Velkari Prime, and it would endure for 10,000 years and beyond.